Good morning, everybody. I will be talking on behalf of Christophe, and like you see, a whole group of co-authors who are part of the Crumble project. This is still work in progress because due to the COVID problems, not all samples have been measured already, so we don't have all the results. I will show you later. Crumble is a project of Ghent University, the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, Free University Brussels, the Brussels French-speaking University, Université Libre de Bruxelles, and the Radiocarbon Lab of the Royal Institute for Heritage. And it's a project funded by EOS. And what were the main goals that we were doing? And the idea was of bringing back the old collections of the Belgian archaeology were conserved in different depots and museums. One of the problems that we have seen with the old collections is that a lot of the preservation of cremated remains, especially old excavations, they are not always preserved anymore. Sometimes they are badly labeled. Some of them are really completely gone. This makes it sometimes this kind of complicated. The idea was of creating a databasis of doing all doing an anthropological study, so finding age and sex of the bones. We had money for refining the chronology that was available for the C14, about 600 dates, but we cover a period from the late Neolithic until the early Middle Ages that we're doing strontium analysis on all the bones, also checking for other technologies and new studying bones, and finally also working on the project. The idea was also, the goal was also making a biological available strontium map for covering the whole of Belgium, and also examining the possibility of other isotopes for future research. That were the main goals that we had in the projects. Two of the important parts were the radiocarbon dating project, especially for late Bronze Age, early Iron Age. You have a lot of informations. Other periods is some less. Everybody knows now we can date cremated bone. It's a matter of selection, especially you need like this one, what we call white bones. So the white and the inner part is completely white. We know also from tests that black burn bones and all, you can have problems with combination. So it's important to have a good selection. Trials have also proposed that the carbon that we use from the bioapatite is in fact composed of the carbon of the body, the atmosphere, and also of the fuel that can be used. There is the possibility of old wood effect, but if you look into the literature about making pyres, also modern pyres, it's best to use young wood. So this problem, the best way to working is with young wood. So the problem of old wood can be, but this effect can happen. For stable isotopes, everybody knows you have the geology is important. The weathering of it, you get the strontium getting into the soil by the plants that are eating, and by the water it's getting in the ecological system, and animals and humans take up the strontium. By measuring them, you can establish using teeth, the animal of teeth. You have an idea what of people, the food they were processing when they were young. The bones have the food they're processing in the last life, and this is the way you can work. This is for the moment the strontium map that we are making in Belgium. Like I said before, due to COVID, not everything has been sampled. There is a whole grid system, like you see here. And within each grid that covers the whole part of Belgium, tree plants are gathered in a natural environment, so to avoid contamination, to be measured in the lab. And the whole idea is that way to make a whole map for Belgium. The blue ones are almost, the green ones are almost completely filmed. The blue ones are in progress. So this map is not completely available. We hope that within the beginning of next year, that we have a complete map. Eugène talked to you already yesterday about the elite burials in Belgium. The round dots are the one we will discuss today, where we have archeometric data. The other ones are the other sides. One of the most interesting that you see is a lot of concentration is here. When we look to urnfields from late Bronze Age and early Iron Age period, most of them are known here. So graves with elite burials, we have a concentration in the Dalle Valley here, close to Brussels. The other one part in the Haine Valley, and then two here in the Ardennes. But most of them are dispersed, and a bit contrary with what we see for the Urnfield themselves, that they are concentrated in another region. One of the recent one excavated is the site of Hofstade Kasteelstraat. You have two large monuments, late Neolithic, Middle Bronze Age, and then you have a whole cemetery about late Bronze Age, early Iron Age. The grave, this what I will talk, was found in this area. And the interesting to know is that most of the early Iron Age graves are situated in that area. The whole cemetery that we covered were about 400 more than 400 cremation graves. It's the largest one that we have in Belgium. We had 9 ring ditches, one long barrow of a Langgraben. We already said we have one late Mesolithic and a Middle Bronze Age barrow. The other ones we could not date. And a combination of C14 and typological studies that we have a late Bronze Age, early Iron occupation for the cemetery. According to me, the cemetery itself stops before the end of the early Iron Age. There are some indications we're missing some type of urns that probably it stops before. But with radiocarbon, you cannot really prove that. With all these graves, there's only one sword grave found already early. Part of it, unfortunately, decapitated not in the sector of the early Iron Age. That is interesting because their concentrated is a bit away for us. It seems to be a so-called flat grave. There is no indication for a monument. We had fragments of a sword from the so-called Villemont type and a chap that in the typology is 1182. There have been radiocarbon dates. There was a first radiocarbon date here that seems to be a bit older. That covers 10th century, 9th century. This is a new radiocarbon date in the Crumble project, and you see it follows a transition in the 8th century, and this confirms, in fact, more with the typological date that we have for the grave itself. What is the problem with this older date? You could say maybe old wood effect, but if bones is coming from the same cremation pyre, you would expect with the exchange of the carbon that they have the same date. Another explanation is something that we have seen recently in the Urnfield cemetery of Herstal with the combination of radiocarbon dates, strontium and oxygen, that we see that there is a mixed up within the grave of older cremated remains. In Herstal we have about 2-3 examples where we see that older cremated remains has been deposited together with an older cremation up. And there are 2-3 other sites where we have this also. But this is something we only could see with the strontium analysis. Maybe this can be an explanation for this older date that we have an addition of older cremated remains that are added at the moment of the deposit of this grave also. Then we have near Harereken is an excavation from the 80s, about 250 cremations in an area also dominated by flat grave, all of them late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, and also here a bit like in Hofstade, there is one grave, an elite burial. It's only one. We did the whole cemetery also. Most of both of cemeteries are the same pattern we see for Urnfield cemeteries, very sober, not much funerary gifts. And this is cremation 72. Eugène has been talking about it. According to a recent study from the bones, probably a male adult, young adult woman, and potentially a third person. We have three swords from mostly Gundling and Villemont type. You have also 3 spearheads and 2 chaps, also one Copley-form and Cyan Ridge. And here we have also a radiocarbon date that seems to be a bit older than that we would expect from the position of the graves also. But there are no other dates available of recent dates built for this cemetery. Then we move to Cours Saint-Etienne. There's excavate already known in the 18th century, but the excavations that have been done were mostly late 19th, early 20th century We have this part of Bertremont. You have this area of La Quinique, and you have a zone of La Ferme Rouge. What we see here, we know that there are two urnfield areas in Bertremont and La Quinique, but we have the so-called flat graves, and there are indications from elite burials in La Ferme Rouge and also the old excavations from La Quinique. You here see some examples of these from the excavations in the early 20th century from La Ferme Rouge. And here you see a burial tree. And one of the problems we had with the elite burials in Cours Saint-Etienne, you see here two of the urns were completely filled up. And this happened in the museum years ago when they reorganized the museum. And in the Brussels Museum, they decided to put all the bones from the different urns together in one urn, because it's a nice view for the people how to see it. What means that all these that most of the bones that coming from the elite burials are mixed up together. So you cannot trust them anymore. We don't know exactly from one urn anymore, and these are mixed up. There are a few bones who have been separated, but they all come from La Quinique. We have been radiocarbonating them, and they are also they are all in the late Bronze Age, and they confirm the urns that we have for that period. I know that, Sasha, you had mentioned in your PhD the presence of still some bones from other urns. When you were collecting them, they were not available for the moment. They had been reorganizing all the bones in different boxes, and the 2-3 that you see, they're still missing at the moment. So maybe we hope we find them once, but this is, the problem with cremated remains and conservation in museums and depots is sometimes, from an archaeological point of view, very complicated. Then you have Harchy, the sites. We know about the existence of 4 sword graves. They are all mentioned with E, probably flat graves. There is no indications of monuments that we have. These have been radiocarbon dated. We have 3 results for them. 2 are falling just before the plateau that we have here. And here we have grave 2, probably an adult male with a sword of the type Pierrepont. Unfortunately, this is the date who falls in the Hallstatt plateau. So the date is older than you would expect for the sword. One explanation can be maybe that the sword has been deposited with the younger burial that we have. We have more interesting results for grave 1. That seems to be a male adult type Filmont, and here you see the radiocarbon date who falls perfectly in the transition around the 8th century, who falls also in the same period with the result that we have for Hofstade. And the same for cremation 4. We couldn't identify the person who it was, so we don't have idea about age and sex. Same sword type Filmont, but also falling in the same period around the 8th transition of the 8th century BC. And this is a period you can really date very sharply in with C14 in the calibration curve. Then you have an older excavation from Chevaudeau in the 19th century. We know about the existence about the 40 cremation grave. 4 of them were sword graves, 3 iron, so that's called Mindelheim-Tuppe, 1 Gundelingen. Bones have been preserved in the local archaeological society in the Museum of Namur, but they are all not easy to associate with the graves. It's also an old 19th century excavation. The documentation is always quite clear what it is. Luckily, there are still some, there was bones preserved from 1 grave that was available. We cannot associate it for sure with one of the sword graves, but here we have a date that falls completely in the Hallstatt plateau. Finally, we have Louet Saint-Pierre, also an excavation from the same period, in the same about the middle of the 19th century, preserved in the same collection. We know that there are 17 barrows with 2, and 2 of them razors have been found. There had already been 2-3 dates done. We have new dates about 1 grave here that is described as grave 12, but we have a back A and a bag B. Maybe two deposits in the same grave. We have seen it in other grave fields in that area. The other dates we cannot attribute, but we see transition, late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, and then two dates who fall completely in the Hallstatt Plateau. We're still doing isotopes on them. On top of them, you see the results from Louet Saint-Pierre and Chevaudeau. They're coming from the Ardennes region, and from an isotopic, this is a complicated area with a very complex geological situation, but the map is not completely ready, but they seems to fix together. Interesting is here is the results from Hofstade. Here in orange, we have the sword grave from Hofstade, and this seems to be a local person. So he fits together with all the other graves that has been measured isotopically. So it's somebody from the local persons. And it's also quite interesting. He's the only one with a sword grave. In all the other graves, we have maybe less than 10%. We have small deposits like a fragment of iron, of a few bronze ornaments. They are a very sober, poor ritual that we have. And he's an exception within the cemetery, but he fits in with what we see for the local population. And this is another cemetery that we have been studied in Veselka. There's nothing, it's a normal classical urn field like we see with not much grave goods. There is one here, Paddestraat, the other one is Provinciebaan. The one at Provinciebaan is one ring ditch, 11 graves partly covered by a Gallo-Roman occupation afterwards in the Straat pit. The one of Paddestraat has been two excavations in the 70s, one area here, one here with about 41 cremation graves that we found. This has never been excavated. There is 100 meters between the two, so probably this is a cemetery also with a few hundred graves that we can estimate. Radiocarbon dating showed that Paddestraat started in the beginning of the late Bronze Age from 1200, had an occupation until the early Iron Age. Provinciebaan started at the end of the late Bronze Age with an occupation rather in the early Iron Age. Within the beginning of the project, we did sampling for plants in that area. You see here the two cemeteries, the different areas we have been sampled, and these were the results of the strontium measuring, Paddestraat, Provinciebaan, and the area of the natural samples. And sorry, this one misplaced here. These are the results that we plotted on the strontium, biological strontium. This is within 2 sigma, the whole biological strontiums that we have for the Veselka area. And what we see when we plot the radiocarbon dates, that's when we arrive end of the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, we have some outliers. None of the graves are special. The only one that you can say is this one from Provinciebaan, that is different in the way it's an urn covered by a bowl, and inside we have a few fragments from 3 other pots who have been cremated together with the remains. But this is the only exception. There is nothing more exceptional, or nothing that has really a rich status with him. One of our colleagues has just deposited her PhD on the site, and one of the sites he studied was the Urnfield of Destelbergen, and he has to defend in December, January. But she said also the results from Destelbergen that only at the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, you see some people having access to food from a different region. So when we talk about mobility from the most of the population in late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, seems to be stable in the region. It's only a few outliers that we have. Sorry, I have mixed up, and thank you for your attention on behalf of the whole team.